Hey, Phil Steele here with another Luminar update. In version 1.1, Luminar released a very interesting new feature called Portrait Background Removal, which allows you to replace the background in a photo of a person with a different background. Now, we're going to look at several examples, not only to show you how it works, but also to see the kind of problems you can run into and how to fix them. Now, before we get started, I have links down below in the description where you can get Luminar using my discount, and also a link to a complete Luminar training course that I highly recommend. If you're fumbling your way through Luminar, that course will get you on the right path. All right, I'll go through several examples to show different kind of problems that you can encounter, but first let's do a simple one. This is one with a nice clean background. Now, this photo is from my original off-camera flash portrait course, and if you're interested in seeing how you light photos like this, I'll put a link to that course down below in the description. But what you can see here is that I was using a sheet as the background. It doesn't look bad, but it looks like a sheet, so let's try dropping her into a different background. Now, the Portrait Background Removal tool you might think would be under the Portrait tools, but don't go looking for it down there. That's not where you find it. It's actually in the Layer Properties. So we open up Layer Properties, look under Masking, and Portrait Background is there. We click on that, and then you just click Remove, and we'll see what it does on its own. And you can see it basically did a perfect job. In fact, I'm not going to refine this. We'll refine it in some of the later examples where you can see what kind of problems it runs into. I'm just going to go with it exactly as the Luminar AI identified the background. Now the next step is to add another layer that contains the background we want to drop in there. So I'm going to go to the Layers panel, click on plus to add a new one, and let's see, I think I'll pick this. It's just a painted wall that's a background. I'm going to click on Fill to make it fill the space. Now it drops it in at 50% opacity so you can see what you're doing. So I'm going to increase it to 100% opacity. And now because this is on top, she's obscured. But to rearrange that, all we have to do is drag the layer down so she's above. And voila, we've got her on the new background. So you can see how easy that was. But I think I want to modify it just a little more, just to make this background a little less in focus so it looks like it's a little more distant behind her. Now I have to make sure that I'm on the right layer. If I start making changes, I've got the layer with her selected, so I want to select the other layer before I start making changes. So I'm just going to go to the Structure tool, and I'm going to reduce it, which reduces the contrast. It'll just blur that background a bit. I can boost what I'm doing to even blur it a little further. Yeah, and that looks blurrier, that's fine. And I think I'm going to also go down to the Details tool, and I'm just going to reduce that to blur it even further. So that's already looking better. It's blurrier, looks like it's further behind her, but I can enhance that even further by adding a little bit of vignette. So I'm going to close the Details panel. I'm going to go to the Vignette panel, and to get it in the right place, first I'm going to choose the subject. I'm just going to click right sort of in the center of her to place that. Now I'm going to bring the amount down to darken it, but it's too big, so I need to bring the size down also. So now we can kind of see it's coming in from the bottom and from the top simultaneously. And I like the look of that. It makes the background look like it's getting hit by the light on her face, and her body is blocking it down here, and the light just isn't hitting as hard up there. So this looks much more three-dimensional now. So I'll close that Vignette panel, and there's my before photo with the sheet in the background. Here's my after photo with the replaced background. Now one more thing I might want to do before I stop is add a vignette on her to kind of tone down her outfit here at the bottom, which is a little distracting. So I'll switch layers to get her selected. Open the Vignette tool again, and I will just bring it down and see what it starts doing. I like what it's doing down at the bottom on her clothing, but not at the top on her hair. So I can always just choose the subject and then click where I want the center, of my vignette to be. I think I'll put it about there to keep her hair lit while the vignette operates at the bottom of the photo. And then I can just dial it to the level where I like it. So I'll close that panel. Now just for before and after, there's the before photo with the sheet in the background. There's the after photo with the replaced background. Now let's look at a different kind of example. Unlike the previous one, this was not shot in front of a studio background. This was shot outdoors. And unlike the previous one, I'm not going to put him in front of a studio backdrop. I'm going to put him into a different outdoor setting. So the first thing is to remove this background. So once again, we go to Layer Properties, Masking, Portrait Background, Remove. And it did an excellent job again. I can see one problem right out of the gate though. I can see down here it looks like it removed a piece of his leg between his arm and where his pants go right there. I think this is all supposed to be him. So we're going to have to refine this. I can also see maybe right here around his ear and on his shoulder. He might have a little bit of background missing. So I'm going to go into the refinements brush of this masking tool. And now you'll see how you refine one of these and tell it exactly where it ought to be. So anything in blue is what the Luminar AI is certain is background. Anything in orange is what it's certain is the subject. And then the transparent zone in between is what it calls the transition, what it thinks is the edge of the subject. And you can see it's done a very good job. But down at this quadrant in the corner, let me zoom in and look at this a little closer down here. So down in this little quadrant, you can see the mistake it made. It thinks this is part of the background and it removed it, when really this is all part of the subject. That's part of his pants. So we're going to tell it to make this part of the subject. So in this case, I'm going to click on the button. It says object, not subject. But you can see it's orange, which makes it easy to tell what you're doing. If I click on the button that says background, it's blue. So it's very easy, color-coded, so you don't make mistakes. So I'm going to click on the one that says object, and then I'm just going to paint in this area to tell it this is all the object, not the background. And if I close this tool, you can see it got his pants back. So let me zoom out. Let me take a look at his ear. I think right here, it's got a little bit of background missing. So once again, I'm going to open the refinements brush. Looks like I accidentally painted a piece with the transition brush on his face. So I'm just going to undo that, fix my little error, and reconfirm that this is part of the object. Now let me go to the background brush and make it very small so I can get this little piece here by his ear where it didn't recognize that. And you can see the AI figures it out. I don't have to paint every bit of this. It figures out, okay, now I've got this as background. I'm going to do the same right here where I think it's a little weak. That went a little too far. So I'm going to go back and say, no, this is his ear right there. I'm going to do the transition in between just to make sure it knows what it's doing. Yeah, that looks good. That's the edge of his ear. That's the edge of his collar. It's got that figured out. Let me see. His hair looks good. I think it's good enough. We'll look at some more complicated hair on another one. All right, I think this guy's ready to go. So I'm going to close the refinements brush panel so he looks normal again. Now I'm going to add the new background. So I go to the layers panel. I click on plus to add a new layer. Let me see what I have here. I'm going to pick this beach scene background. Now it's a little smaller than his photo, so I could stretch it with my hands like this. I'll just expand the size of it. I think I'll bring it kind of about like that. And it's at 50% opacity, so I'm just going to push it up to 100. And then I need to rearrange my layers. So I'll just drag him above the background layer. So there he is. Now I think, let me see, I think I want to stretch my background layer a little more, maybe to get rid of this part down here, which looks a little strange. But I can't get to the control handles on it because I dragged them outside. So first I'm going to make it fit. And then I'm going to expand it by dragging that down there. And I'll drag this one off up there. I'm going to move it down slightly like that. Okay, now I'm content with the position of that background. Now I see a little problem right here where I did my repair on the background. It didn't quite get the whole thing connected there. So I'm just going to come back into the layer with him. I'll go back into the portrait background masking. I'll say remove so that I can get into the refinement brush. Make it a little more clear that this is all background. I'll do the same over here just to make sure it gets the idea. The AI is pretty smart, and it kind of learns from what you do. It gets better and better. Let me close that, see how it looks. Yeah, that looks perfect around his ears. His hair is doing great, especially with a white background. It's easy for the hair to come in. So I don't see any problems now in the masking of him. Now, fortunately, in this case, his color temperature already matches the scene pretty well. If it didn't, what I would do is come into the Develop tool, and I might do something like adjust the color temperature here. If he wasn't warm enough, I could warm him up, or I could cool him down, but he just happens to match pretty well. So I'll go back to about there. Looks pretty good to me. Now, there is one thing that's kind of bothering me. Right here, this piece of sand looks fairly in focus, but we really have a pretty shallow depth of field on his eyes. I mean, you can see his pants here are fairly out of focus, and then that sand in the background is even farther away. So it doesn't look right to me that the focus is dropping off this quickly on his body, and then that's kind of sharp. The background looks great in the distance, but I want to defocus this piece of sand because it's sort of spoiling the illusion to me. So there are different ways I could do this, but I think what I'll do is go into the structure tool, which is good for blurring things. Oops, I want to make sure I'm on the background layer. Background layer, go into the structure tool. I'm going to reduce it to blur everything, and then maybe boost that to blur it even more. But now it's blurring the background more than I want it to. So what I'm going to do is just paint it in to this part right here. So I go into the masking now, brush, and in this case I'm going to paint it in rather than erase. So I'm going to make my brush kind of big and soft, and I'm just going to paint in the blurring here. And it's just affecting the background, even though you could see that mask looks like it's on him. I'm only working on the background layer. I'm going to blur that part right there too a little bit. So now I think that looks good. I'm going to close this structure tool, and just to look at the before and after. There's before, where our guy's in the city, and after, where he's on the beach. I actually think, given his color temperature, it actually looks more like he's on the beach than in the city. All right, now we're going to do one that's a little trickier because this hair can be a little complicated on this one. Now, this is another photo that was shot as part of my original off-camera flash portrait course. And this is not a white background. I'm actually shooting against a window, and this is just a blown out window behind her. You can see a little piece of a window frame right there and over here. But let's say we want to drop a different background behind her. So as always, we go to Layer Properties, Masking, Portrait Background. Let it think for a minute. Remove. And it does a pretty good job, but we can see some flaws right out of the gate. For example, right here there's a big area of background that it failed to remove. And over here in this part of her hair, there's some background behind there. And as we'll see, the edges of the hair around here are actually going to need some work. So let's do a couple of the big chunks right away just to get that out of the way. Come in with the refinement brush. And you can see it just screwed up, and I thought this is part of the object. We're going to tell that that's part of the background. And let me get the transition brush and go along the edge of her body and hair here. Tell it where the transition is. And it still hasn't figured out that this is supposed to be background in here. So we'll give it a hand. It's getting better. Now I'm going to help it find the edge by picking the object brush and just kind of come along inside the edge of her face and her shoulder here. It'll help it know what's what. Sometimes the AI gets a little confused, so we'll just help define it. And see how that's looking. That's looking a lot better down there. Let me come over and take a look at the hair in this corner. Now, this part where there's background and hair mixed together, that's a good time for the transition brush. So I'm just going to tell it this is all transitional in here. And a little bit right there. Then I'm going to help it. This is her shoulder here, so get that as object. Get this hair here as object. Let's turn off the brush. Yeah, that's looking pretty good down there. I think we'll save some of these other details on the hair until we get the background in, and it might be easier to see what needs to be fixed. I'll make a real quick pass with the object brush just to help it know that this is all her. And we'll do the details on that hair in a moment. Let's see how it's looking now. All right, so next step, let's go get our background. Go into the layers, plus, I'm going to put her on a white brick wall because this is such a high key photo. I don't want to try to drop her into something that looks totally ridiculous. So this will be a believable background. White bricks. Swap the order of my layers to get her on top. And it's already looking pretty good, as you can see. But you can also tell we've got a little bit of haloing on the edge of the hair. We'll have to deal with there. Now the first thing I want to do, I think, she is so bright, I'm going to tone her brightness down just a little bit. Develop tool, just bring the exposure down a wee bit on her. And the highlights I think I'll bring down a little bit too, so that she's not quite so crazy bright. While I'm on her, I might as well come and sharpen her up a little bit with the details, small details to bring out like the eyes and the lashes. There, it pops in. You can see the improvement. Also helps get her hair. Maybe I'll do the medium details a little bit too. Don't want to turn up details too much on female models and start bringing out blemishes. I'll go back off on the medium details. It's looking pretty good, I think. Now going back to the background, I don't really like this dark bar going right through her head, so I'm just going to stretch the background a little, maybe move it up. I can't see the bottom part anyway, so I'll kind of move up the bottom part, position it a little better. Kind of like it like that. But now one thing that bothers me is the fact that she is very strongly lit from the left with the light falling off in this direction, but the background looks evenly lit. So to bring it a little more in line, I want to kind of put a lighting gradient on the background so it's getting darker at the right side as the light is on her. So I've got my background layer selected. I'm going to go into my develop tool. I'm going to go into masking. I'm going to use a linear gradient, and I'm going to drag it this direction. Whoops. Now I think I'm going to invert it so it's effective on this side. And then I'm just going to bring the exposure down, and you can see it's bringing it down on the right side. I'm just going to bring it down a little bit over there. So now we've got it's brighter over here, darker over here, which is consistent with the light on her. Go just a wee bit more. So that's a big improvement, but I think I also want to do the vignette on the background as we've done before to make it look more three-dimensional. So I'm going to close that, get the vignette tool, choose my subject. I think I'm going to put my subject center about right here because I want it to be darker on this side. So let me see what happens. I'm going to make it smaller. What happens if I... Yeah, that's kind of getting... And see how, because I positioned the center of it over here, it's darkening that side more. It's bringing in a little behind her here as if she is blocking the light, which is what I want. It's bringing it in up here also. But it's starting to also reveal this haloing around her hair and her shoulder, which we're going to have to fix up. I'll close that. I think I'll take a little bit of the detail out of that background too, just to make it look a little less sharp. Now I'm liking the look of this in general, but I do think we need to come in and fix up the edges of her hair to get rid of this haloing that we're seeing there. So I need to come back into layer properties, masking, portrait background. And you notice I did that without changing layers. So it's saying no portrait found. That's because I'm on the background layer. Let's switch to her. Layer properties, masking, portrait background, remove, refinements brush. Okay, let's come in and clean this stuff up a bit. So the tricky parts tend to be these transition areas. So I'm going to paint with the transition brush right here to try to help it understand, but it's also helpful to define more clearly for it what is the object and what is the background. Sometimes you have to get pretty detailed if you've got tricky hair. Switch to my background brush, bring it all the way right in here near the edge. Now I'm going to get my transition brush, come in again and try to help it understand that this is a mixture of hair and background right here. Really help it understand the edges. Transition brush, object brush. Well, let me see how that part's looking. Looking pretty good, except that little, you need to get that little corner right there. So you can just turn on and off the refinements brush to see what's going on. So I'm going to come in even closer and fix that little corner where I can see it's confused about what's background and what's not. So I'm just going to make it really small. Come right in here. That's looking a lot better. That part's looking pretty good. Help it a little here. Tell it this is background. Fix that. I'm going to get the transition brush. Let's see how this is looking. That's looking way better. So I'm going to speed up now so you don't have to watch me do every detail of it. It's looking a lot better around her hair. I think I need to do something with her shoulder down here. I'll take my transition brush and do that area. I think that's going to get it. Yep. So there we go. There's your before, there's your after. Portrait background removal. See the links below in the description for a complete Luminar training course that I highly recommend, and also a link to get Luminar using my discount. You'll also find a link to my big Luminar review, where I explain why I find Luminar useful, even though I have Lightroom and Photoshop, and how I use Luminar in conjunction with Lightroom and Photoshop. And finally, I'll put links down there to my 2 off-camera flash courses, where I teach you the lighting techniques that I used to take the portraits of the 2 women we saw in this video. I hope you found this helpful, and I look forward to talking to you again soon.